Fort Riley looks like any other army post in Kansas, until night falls and the dead start doing roll call. So many of you have been sending in stories from your time in uniform that my inbox now looks like a classified archive of the weird. From infantry grunts to aircrew, medics to MPs, troops from all over the world keep telling me the same thing. I saw something out there I still can't explain. We've heard about everything you can imagine creeping around training areas and patrol routes. Huge, shadow figures in the tree line. Things that howl like wolves but stand on two legs. Lights in the sky that don't move like anything man-made. Even the monsters from campfire jokes. Giant spiders, crawling pale things, old-world demons show up in these emails more than you'd think. But when I sort through all those accounts, one category always rises to the top. The barracks and on-post housing that refuse to stay empty, no matter what's written on the duty roster. Think about it, if spirits cling to places of stress and violence, where else would they go besides the places soldiers sleep between wars? Over the past few months, I've been trying to turn this mountain of stories into future episodes. I color-code them, map them by unit and base, try to see patterns. That's when one name kept lighting up my notes like a red flare. Fort Riley, not one or two odd stories. A cluster, different years, different MOSs, same post. Fort Riley sits in the northeast corner of Kansas, tucked along the Kaw River and spreading out over the prairie like a small city in uniform. The place is huge. Tens of thousands of acres of ranges, motor pools, housing areas, and old stone buildings that were there before your great-grandparents were born. It's home to units everybody's heard of, the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One of the oldest continuously active divisions in the U.S. Army, generations have passed through those gates to ship out for war and come back changed, if they came back at all. But Fort Riley's story isn't just decorations and deployments. Long before anyone worried about Iraq or Afghanistan, troops there were fighting invisible enemies that didn't care about rank, training, or body armor. In the 1850s, not long after the post went up, disease ripped through the place. A cholera outbreak tore into soldiers, laborers, and civilians. Imagine building a new frontier fort, and within weeks over 100 people are dead. Fast, ugly deaths, buried almost as quickly as they fell. Decades later, another killer arrived. This one you've actually read about in history class, though nobody could see it coming back then. In 1918, while the world was already on fire from the Great War, a strange sickness started spreading among the packed barracks and training fields of Fort Riley. The numbers stationed there at the time were insane. Tens of thousands of troops crammed into close quarters, perfect fuel for an invisible blaze. That outbreak is widely believed to have been one of the sparks that ignited the Spanish flu pandemic in America. How many soldiers and family members died on that post because of it? We don't know the exact count. But when a disease goes on to kill tens of millions worldwide, you can guess the local toll wasn't small. So picture that for a second. One piece of ground soaked in fear, sudden death, and grief over and over again for more than a century and a half. If there's any truth to the idea that places can hold on to trauma, what do you think is echoing through those halls after lights out? Maybe that's why so many of you swear Fort Riley is one of the most haunted duty stations in the country. And after reading these accounts, I'm not sure I'd want orders there myself. Tonight, we're diving into some of the strangest things reported on and around that post, starting with whatever stalked the second floor of an old army barracks one ordinary Friday night. Dude, pick up the phone. Yeah. Bro, are you in your room? Obviously, why? I need you to come out here right now, something's wrong. What did the Wi-Fi crash again? Call CQ. I'm serious, man, a chair just flew at me. A tense pause, you high. I swear to God, it came at me by itself. This first account comes from an MP who was stationed at Fort Riley a few years ago. For privacy, we'll call him R. He was assigned to an old stone barracks that sat near a cavalry parade ground. A T-shaped building with long, echoing hallways and motion sensor lights that always seemed to shut off just when you needed them on. R had lucked out with a single room near the end of one of those hallways. If you walked to the far end of the corridor, his door was the last one on the left before a fire escape. On the other side of his wall was another set of rooms, two tiny bedrooms connected by a shared little kitchen and bathroom. One of those was empty. The other belonged to a guy we'll call KK did not have the best reputation. People whispered about drugs, random behavior. Not the kind of neighbor you expect to be your source for a credible ghost story. It was a Friday night, a little after 2200. R had just come back from the gym and was sitting in his room, annihilating a plate of chicken and rice, scrolling his phone. The usual. Then he heard a violent crash from K's side, a clatter loud enough to make him pause mid-bite. At first, R just rolled his eyes, probably K tripping over something while baked out of his mind. Maybe he knocked over a chair or booted a trash can, nothing unusual. But then R heard K's door open, footsteps in the hallway, and a knock at his own door that didn't sound like someone joking around. He opened it to find K white as a sheet, eyes wide, breathing fast. This wasn't the sloppy, joking version of the guy that R was used to seeing. Something just threw a chair at me, K blurted. I wasn't even near it. What would you think in that moment, possession, prank, or psychotic break? R believed in the possibility of weird stuff, but he also believed in verifying things. So instead of just slamming the door, he followed K across the hall into the shared kitchen and common area. The room looked ordinary, except for one detail. A heavy chair lying on its side in the middle of the floor, far from where K swore it normally stayed. There was no one else inside, no obvious explanation, no broken light fixture or falling shelf that could have knocked it over. Still, R wanted to rule out human stupidity before blaming the supernatural. He set the chair upright and dragged it all the way to the back of the room, near the window. Then he stepped out into the hallway again and pulled the door shut behind him. These weren't flimsy interior doors. You needed your key card to get back in, and if somebody tried to force it, you'd hear the impact through the wall. Two important details here, and R emphasizes both. First, after that, K did not go back into his room. He walked straight across the corridor to hang out with another soldier. We'll call that guy B second. R was the last person inside K's place, and when he left, the door was closed and locked. Satisfied he'd done his neighborly inspection, R went back to his own room, sat down, and dug back into his food. A few minutes passed, just long enough for his heartbeat to settle and the whole thing to start feeling dumb. Then he heard it. The unmistakable sound of a chair's legs scraping slowly across tile, coming from K's locked room. The noise went on for several seconds, deliberate, dragging like someone taking their time moving it from the window back toward the center of the floor. R froze, fork halfway to his mouth, every hair on his arm standing up. Had K somehow slipped past him? Had someone broken in? Or was he listening to something move that chair, alone? R slammed his fork down, anger beating back the fear. If K thought this was funny, he'd make sure the whole platoon heard about it. He marched into the hallway and pounded on K's door. "Open up, I know you're in there." Silence, No footsteps, no giggle, nothing, just the hum of the hallway lights. R was about to start swiping his key card when B's door opened behind him. K was inside, sitting on B's bed, still rattled, staring like he wanted to be anywhere but there. "You done messing with that chair?" R demanded. K looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about, man? I haven't moved." B frowned. "He's been here the whole time. What's going on?" A cold line of sweat ran down R's back. If Kay hadn't gone back in, who was dragging that chair, they all crossed the hall together. R unlocked the door and swung it open, half expecting somebody to jump out. Instead, the room was quiet. No intruder, no prankster. The chair, however, was no longer by the window. It sat dead center in the room again, just where R had heard it move to. Kay stared. "I told you." B shifted his weight nervously. "Maybe it was like that and you just misremembered." R wanted to believe that, but he knew where he'd put the thing. MPs are trained to notice positions, angles, details. He'd placed that chair flush against the wall near the window. Now it was several feet away, turned at a different angle. "Okay," R said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "If something wants to play games with this chair, we'll see how it likes being stuck." He stepped fully into the bedroom, leaving K and B hovering at the doorway. R dug around in a drawer until he found a half-used roll of duct tape, standard Barracks tool. "What are you doing?" B asked. "Making sure this thing can't move again unless someone physically rips it free." He dragged the chair over to Kay's metal bed frame and started wrapping tape around both. The legs, the back, binding wood and steel together until the roll squealed empty. He tugged on it when he finished. Solid, if it shifted now, the sound of tearing tape would be impossible to miss. Kay shook his head. "Dude, that's just gonna piss it off." "Good," R said, only half joking. "Then maybe it'll show itself." The three of them stepped back into the common area. R pulled the bedroom door nearly shut, leaving it open just a crack. The main door to the hallway was still ajar. "So what now?" B asked. "Now we give it 5 minutes," R replied, "and if nothing happens, we chalk it up to a weird coincidence and go to sleep." Kay opened his mouth to argue when a solid metallic clack echoed through the little apartment. The deadbolt on the front door had just thrown itself. The three of them froze. None of them were touching the door. "That wasn't you?" B whispered. R shook his head. Nobody moved. Before any of them could react, the oven in the corner of the kitchenette beeped, its display flickering on. The heating element began to glow red all on its own. Kay swore and rushed over, twisting the dials frantically to shut it off. He yanked open the door as if something might be burning inside. Nothing. No pans, no food, just rising heat and the sharp smell of dust baking. That was enough for B. He backed into the hallway, hands up like he was unarmed at a traffic stop. "Nope, I'm good. I am not sticking around for this." R followed him out, heart hammering. Kay turned off the oven and hurried out after them, leaving the haunted little kitchen shining behind them. R, though, made the mistake of glancing down the long, fluorescent-lit hallway. At the far end, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, something vanished around the corner. R didn't see a full body, just a thick, solid black tail, maybe 2 feet long, stretching out behind some low, unseen shape as it slipped left out of sight. It wasn't wispy like smoke. It wasn't a trick of the light. It looked animal, heavy, wrong. As it disappeared, the motion-activated lights in that section of the hall flicked off, leaving only the lights near the 3 soldiers still burning. "Tell me you saw that," R said, voice low. B swallowed. "I saw the tail." R nodded slowly. "I saw the tail and I heard it. Because along with that vanishing shape, something had growled, a deep, low rumble that vibrated in his chest more than in his ears. Not a dog, not a person, something else. He should have stopped there, any smart person would have. Instead, the MP instincts kicked in. R stepped cautiously down the hall toward where he'd seen the tail, fingers brushing the wall. He turned the corner. Nothing, just more doors, more empty hallway, more hum from the lights. No tail, no creature, no scraping, no sound. So where did it go? Through a door? Into the floor? Out of the building entirely? R walked back to the others, pulse still racing. They huddled there for a few minutes, whispering, trying to process what had just happened. Kay announced he was going to his girlfriend's off-post, no discussion. B looked like he wanted to do the same, but didn't have anywhere else to go. Eventually, they all retreated to their rooms, doors shut, duty phones nearby. Sleep did not come easy. By Monday morning, they'd almost convinced themselves it had all been nerves, group hysteria, or some stupid explanation they just hadn't thought of yet. People do that to cope. We sand down the edges of whatever scared us so we can function. They were getting coffee with another buddy, call him Jay, when R and B decided to finally bring it up. But before they could spill a word, Jay beat them to the punch. "You guys ever get weird vibes in the barracks?" he asked, unprompted. R and B traded a look. "What do you mean by weird?" Jay hesitated, then said, "I had something happen Friday night. Thought I was losing my mind." He explained that around 22:30, same time R had been hearing the chair drag overhead. He'd been lying in bed on the first floor, trying to fall asleep. Suddenly, he realized he couldn't move. Sleep paralysis locked his body down, but his mind was wide awake, heart pounding. Then the ceiling light above him changed. Shadows started pouring out of it, like ink spreading in water, except the ink took shape. Figures peeled themselves from the glow and stepped down into his room, faceless silhouettes that walked around his bed, watching him. He said the air felt like it was crushing his chest, not physically, but emotionally, like pure dread turned into weight. He tried to scream. Nothing came out. And then, just like that, he snapped awake. The light was normal, room quiet. His clock read about 22:30. Jay shrugged it off as a nightmare until R told him whose room was directly above his. Kay's, the same room where the chair had moved on its own. The same room where the oven powered up and the deadbolt slammed home. Different floors, different soldiers, same time, same patch of haunted concrete. That was just one night in one building on Fort Riley. Unfortunately for the people stationed there, the base, housing, and barracks seemed to have a lot more residents than show up on the duty roster. And sometimes, those extra residents don't just move chairs. They borrow your voice. They don't just slam doors or rattle cabinets. Sometimes they learn how to sound exactly like the people you love. "Honey, you okay?" He looked up from the ruck he was packing, sitting in the living room surrounded by field gear. "Yeah, I'm good. Why?" His wife stood at the top of the stairs, face creased with worry. "Were you just crying?" "Crying?" He laughed once. "No, I'm stuffing socks and hoping I didn't forget my poncho." "Why?" She came down a few steps. "I heard you, full-on sobbing." "I thought somebody died." He stared back at her. The house was quiet. His eyes were dry. "You're messing with me," he said. She shook her head. "If you're not messing with me, then who was?" This next account comes from a soldier who spent about 2 years living in on-post housing at Fort Riley with his wife. He wasn't a stranger to weirdness. He says he'd been around unexplainable stuff since childhood. But whatever lived in that house made all his previous experiences look tame. From day one, the place felt watched. Their first night, the two of them were in the master bedroom, brushing their teeth in the little bathroom tucked off to the side. The house was still mostly boxes and half-built furniture. Out of nowhere, they both turned their heads toward the bed at the same exact moment. Hovering there just above the mattress was a dark mass, like a chunk of shadow cut out from the corner of the room and hung in midair. No clear shape, no face. Just a heavy cloud that seemed to drink in the light. Then, in a blink, it was gone. They shared a nervous laugh, blamed it on being exhausted from moving, and tried to ignore the way their skin still crawled. That was the last time the house tried to be subtle. It started small, movement at the edge of their vision, knocks in empty rooms, the classic stuff you tell yourself is just the house settling. But the activity escalated fast. A few nights later, his wife turned in early, leaving him downstairs packing his gear for an upcoming field exercise. He had the living room to himself, ruck open, gear spread everywhere. That's when he heard it, sobbing. Not a quiet sniffle or a little whimper, but raw, stomach-deep crying coming from the floor above him, his bedroom. In an instant, every bad scenario flashed through his mind. Family emergency call, terrible news from home, sudden panic attack. He dropped what he was doing and ran upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. He burst into the bedroom, ready to call 911 if he had to. His wife was lying on the bed, earbuds in, scrolling on her phone like nothing in the world was wrong. No tears, no red eyes, no signs she'd been upset at all. He told her exactly what he'd heard, that gut-wrenching wailing like someone had just been told the worst news of their life. She frowned, pulled out her earbuds, and listened. The house was silent. "You're exhausted," she said gently. "You've been stressed for weeks. You probably misheard something outside." He wanted to accept that. It made sense. Long hours, deployment prep, nerves. He went back downstairs, shook it off, kept packing. Then the house played the same trick again. This time she was the one lying in bed, reading. He was the one downstairs, and she heard him crying. She told him later that she heard his voice plain as day, his cadence, his breathing, choking sobs coming from the staircase right outside the bedroom door. She set her book down, heart racing, and called his name. The crying stopped. When she got up and opened the door, the hallway was empty. She checked the other rooms, then rushed downstairs, where he was sitting in the exact same spot, watching TV, completely fine. He hadn't been upstairs, he hadn't cried. That's when they both realized whatever was in the house wasn't just making noise, it was practicing them. After that, the voices and shapes increased. Shadows walked past doorways when no one else was home. Sometimes they'd hear footsteps on the stairs, closet doors creaking, the faint murmur of conversation, only to find the entire house empty. He started trying to interact with it, more out of morbid curiosity than bravery. When he heard knocks in the walls, he'd answer back and ask for a response. Sometimes something would actually reply, 1 knock for yes, 2 for no. Was that smart? Probably not. But when you live in a place that refuses to pretend it's normal, you either set rules or you let it walk all over you. Then the thing in the house shifted its attention. It focused on his wife. She began waking up with fresh bruises and small cuts that hadn't been there when she went to bed. At first, they blamed the dog, maybe a clumsy bump in the night. But the marks appeared in places that didn't make sense, streaks on her back, scratches on spots she couldn't easily reach. The nightmares followed. She started dreaming about being attacked, vicious, personal, humiliating. Over and over, some unseen figure hurt her in these dreams, and she'd wake up trembling, sore, with new marks on her skin. One morning, they stepped into the hallway and froze. There, on the painted wall, were strange markings. Lines, shapes, little slashes that hadn't been there the day before. It almost looked like someone had lightly carved into the paint with something sharp, then smeared it with a fingertip. As she stared at the pattern, her face went pale, because those shapes didn't just look random to her. They reminded her of scars she carried on her body from a dark period in her past. Scars she rarely showed anyone, scars that told a story she spent years trying to leave behind. Now that story was scratched into the wall of her house. That was the breaking point. The line between weird roommate and we're being targeted had been crossed. They did what a lot of desperate people do when the invisible starts leaving fingerprints. Research. Late-night rabbit holes, forums, old books, asking around. Eventually, they settled on a plan. It sounded ridiculous even as they prepared for it. Burning sage through every room, speaking words of protection, hanging symbols and charms they'd read about. But when your reality has already broken its own rules, a little ritual doesn't feel so crazy. The two of them walked through that house together, smoke trailing in the air, speaking out loud, telling whatever was there that it was not welcome, that it had no right to touch her, that it needed to leave. Laugh if you want. They half laughed at themselves at first. But after that night, something really did change. The voices didn't stop entirely, but they grew faint like sound coming through a wall several houses away. The oppressive feeling in the bedroom lifted. The bruises and scratches stopped appearing. Sleep became normal again most nights. They still felt like they weren't alone sometimes, especially in certain corners of the house. But whatever remained seemed quieter, more neutral. The hostels, if that's what they were, had either moved on or been pushed back. Was it one entity that lost its grip? Several, with one particularly nasty one, finally forced out. They'll probably never know. What they did know was this. Something in that Fort Riley house had studied them well enough to fake their voices, mimic their cries, and carve her pain into the walls. And that same post has plenty of other spirits who don't bother pretending to be you. Some of them are content just to knock, over and over and over, even when there's nobody standing on the other side of the door. Some hauntings announce themselves with full-blown apparitions. Others prefer a simpler tactic, relentless, impossible knocking that sounds like it wants to break your door in. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. He cracked one eye, saw the caller ID, and groaned. "Why is she calling this late?" He thumbed it on. "Yeah." Her voice was a sharp whisper. "Are you at my front door?" He rolled onto his back, staring at the dark ceiling. "No, I'm in bed. Why?" "They won't stop," she hissed. "Whoever it is just keeps banging. I thought it was you screwing around." Heavy thuds boomed in the background, loud enough to rattle the mic. He sat up. "Stay on the phone. I'm going to the window." The next story comes from a soldier stationed at Fort Riley around 2013, living in on-post housing during a cold, snowy winter. It was the kind of night made for wool socks, heavy blankets, and not leaving your bed for any reason that didn't involve enemy contact. He was buried under his covers, drifting off when his phone rang. The name on the screen was his next-door neighbor, a fellow soldier he knew well. As soon as he answered, he could hear the tension in her voice. She asked him straight up if he was outside her house, pounding on her door. He told her the truth. He hadn't moved. She told him hers. Somebody was hammering on her front door like they wanted to break it down, and they wouldn't stop. He swung his legs out of bed, shivering as his feet hit the cold floor. Holding the phone to his ear, he crossed to his own front window, pulled the curtain aside, and peered out toward her porch. The streetlights cast pale, yellow circles across the snow. Her doorway sat in clear view. There was no one there, no movement, no shadows. Just the night and the quiet. He snapped a quick picture and texted it to her. A moment later, she called back, practically in tears. Because even as he looked at that empty porch, she could still hear the pounding as if a fist were slamming the wood. And this time he could hear it too through the speaker of his phone. It wasn't a polite knock. It was violent. Each impact was so loud that her voice shook between them. At that point, the soldier did what most of us would do when we think an intruder's involved. He went from half asleep to fully alert in an instant. He grabbed a weapon, shrugged on a jacket, and stepped out into the freezing air. The snow crunched under his boots as he made his way around her house, phone still pressed to his ear. He scanned the property line, the driveway, the corners where someone might hide. Nothing. No footprints where there shouldn't be any. No silhouettes darting out of sight. He walked up the sidewalk toward her front porch, pulse thudding, and that's when it got truly wrong. As he reached her front door, he heard it for himself. The pounding, except now it wasn't muffled through a phone speaker. It was right there, crashing against the door inches from his face. The entire slab of wood shook with each blow, but there was nobody standing in front of it. He stood on that porch, staring at a violently shuddering door that no human hand was touching. The sound was so loud it seemed impossible the neighbors weren't waking up. This was the moment where all his training, all his instincts as a soldier, suddenly didn't fit the problem in front of him. There was no visible threat to engage, no body to tackle. No rational explanation he could reach for. He watched that invisible assault for a heartbeat too long, and something primordial in his brain snapped. I did not sign up for this, he thought, and he left. He walked straight back to his own house, shut the door behind him, and locked it. Then he just stood there in the dark, one hand still on the knob, trying to process what he'd seen, or rather, what he hadn't seen. How do you tell someone, hey, I watched your front door get rocked like a battering ram, but there was no one actually there? He called his neighbor again, told her as calmly as he could that he hadn't found anything or anyone. Then he hung up, crawled back into bed, and tried, unsuccessfully, to convince his brain that it had all been some bizarre glitch in perception. Because the alternative, accepting that something could hit a door hard enough to make it quake without having a physical form, was worse. We like to imagine that if we ever faced something supernatural, we'd be brave. That we'd capture it on video, fling open the door, shout at it, do something heroic or at least decisive. But over and over in these stories, you see the same reaction. The second your senses tell you that reality isn't working the way it's supposed to, every script you've ever trained for goes out the window. And at Fort Riley, the doors and walls aren't the only thing that gets pushed. Sometimes it's people. Hospitals are already unnerving at night. Long empty corridors, dim lights, machines whispering and chirping, rooms that held someone's last breath just hours before. Now put that hospital on a base like Fort Riley, decades of war trauma, disease, and death layered on top of each other, and you get something else entirely. Our next set of accounts comes from an Army nurse who worked at a community hospital on Fort Riley. We'll call her Elle. Elle says she had her own strange moments on shift, but what really stuck with her were the stories her co-workers shared in the break room. The surgeons, other nurses, techs, people who handled life and death every day and weren't easy to spook. One OB-GYN surgeon in particular came in one morning looking tired and jumpy, and casually mentioned she and her family had just moved off post into a civilian house. It was sudden, no new orders, no major life change. Just gone. Naturally, the questions started flying. Why give up convenient on-base housing? Why the rush? Did something happen? The surgeon hesitated, then finally said it. Our house was haunted. She tried to brush it off at first. On-post quarters at a place like Fort Riley have a reputation. Some addresses are even whispered about, well known among families and easy to find if you dig into local lore. But two particular events shoved her from "this is weird" to "we're leaving." First, there was the kitchen. One afternoon, she and her spouse came back from grocery shopping with their two toddlers in tow. They lugged bags inside, talking about dinner plans. When they stepped into the kitchen, they froze. Every cabinet door, every cupboard, every drawer was wide open. Not cracked an inch, fully extended like someone had gone through them in a hurry or decided to make as much visual chaos as possible. She was absolutely certain she hadn't left them like that. They all were. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing stolen. Just a kitchen taken apart in a way that made the hair on your arms stand up. Creepy? Absolutely. Enough to move out? Not yet. Housing on post can be hard to come by, and military families learn to tolerate a lot. The second encounter changed that. That same evening, they had friends over. Adults downstairs, talking and laughing. The kids, both under 3, were tucked into their beds upstairs. At some point, a noise drifted down from the second floor, rustling, thumping, something that sounded like a mess in the making. Her husband went up to check. A minute later, he shouted for everyone to come see. They all hurried upstairs, probably expecting to find toys scattered everywhere or kids out of bed. Instead, they stepped into the hallway and just stared. Right in the center of the upstairs hall stood a pile of bedding. Not just one blanket tossed aside, but everything. Duvets, sheets, pillowcases, throws, stripped from the beds and stacked into a single towering mound that almost reached the ceiling. It looked deliberate, like someone had been building a fort straight up instead of outward. The surgeon checked the bedrooms. Her toddlers were in their beds, sound asleep, wearing the blank, heavy faces of kids who'd been out for a while. The mattresses were bare. The bedding had all been removed and arranged in that bizarre column in the hall. There is no version of reality where two sleepy toddlers quietly strip multiple beds, carry all that down the hall, and build a blanket mountain that tall without waking anybody up. That was it for them. Whatever they were sharing the house with didn't just have the strength to rearrange a whole floor. It had the intent to put on a show. They started looking for off-post housing almost immediately. As if that wasn't enough, another doctor on the far side of the hospital later told Elle a story about a pilot friend who'd lived in either that same house or one of a small cluster near an airfield. One morning, that pilot walked into his kitchen to find every single canned item he owned lined up neatly in a perfect row across the counter, labels facing out, edges aligned. Each and every can had been opened. Not dented, not punctured. Opened, no one else in the house, no break-in. Just a precise, pointless act of destruction. You can lock your doors against thieves. What do you do against something that rearranges your entire kitchen just to remind you it can? That same doctor also mentioned something a little softer, but no less strange. He told Elle that his family cat had died, but never really left. Friends and relatives who visited their home would occasionally freeze mid-conversation, eyes tracking something moving across the living room. They'd describe a cat, the family's old pet, strolling through a doorway, hopping up onto the arm of a chair, or vanishing around a corner. The only problem, the cat in question had been buried weeks before. These weren't fleeting shadows you could explain away. Guests who didn't even know the story described the animal in detail, its coloring, its gait, exactly matching the dead pet. It wasn't menacing. If anything, it felt like the ghost of a routine, an animal doing what it had always done, unaware that its body had given out. Not all the Fort Riley hauntings were so gentle. Another nurse Elle knew had been assigned one of the famous haunted houses on post, addresses people muttered about in the duty station group chats. At first, her family treated the weird occurrences like campfire material. Things moved. Doors creaked open. Items they swore they'd set down in one place turned up somewhere else. Unsettling but manageable, until the activity got mean. One weekend, the entire family went out of town. When they came back, they didn't even make it to the doorstep before realizing something was wrong. Military police vehicles were parked outside their quarters. Confused, they walked up and introduced themselves. The MPs explained that a 911 call had been placed earlier from inside that very house. The caller had hung up without saying a word. Protocol kicked in. Dispatch traced the call, sent patrols to check on what might have been a domestic situation, a medical emergency, or worse. The nurse and her family told them they'd been gone for days. No one had a key but them. Assuming it might be a break-in, the MPs had already gone through the house, weapons ready, room by room. They found nothing. No forced entry. Nothing disturbed but the general lived-in clutter of a family home. No signs anyone had been there at all. So who dialed 911, and why? They tried to shake it off, but the house didn't stop there. On 2 separate occasions, the nurse's husband reported feeling a sharp shove between his shoulder blades while standing at the top of the staircase. Not a playful bump, a hard, unexpected push that sent him stumbling forward, windmilling his arms to avoid falling. He tried to write it off as losing his balance, until it happened again. Their teenage son wasn't as lucky. He was climbing the stairs when something hit him from behind. He pitched forward, missing a step entirely, tumbling down to the landing below. He came away bruised and shaken, convinced he hadn't just tripped. You can ignore whispers in the walls. You can sleep through creaks, pretend shadows don't look like silhouettes. But when an unseen hand tries to throw your kids down the stairs, that's different. Soon after, they joined the growing list of families who quietly requested a new address. Elle listened to all of these accounts: blanket towers, invisible fists, ghost pets, phantom phone calls, clocking in for shift after shift at that same haunted installation. And though she said her experiences didn't feel as dramatic, they were personal enough to stick with her. Part of Elle's job involved 24-hour in-house call. When the wards were calm and all immediate tasks were done, staff on call could grab a few hours of sleep in a small break room. Couch, TV, thin blanket, the works. The door to the break room stayed open, but just outside was a heavy door leading from the patient holding area to the hallway. That door had a very distinct personality. It creaked loudly when opened and slammed heavily when it swung shut on its hinge. Even in the middle of deep sleep, that sound could drag you back to awareness. Everyone on staff knew it. One night, Elle lay curled up on the couch, her back to the room, facing the wall. The lights were dimmed. The steady beeps and distant murmurs of the hospital had faded into background noise. She drifted under, exhausted. Then she felt it, a firm poke in the middle of her back, like someone standing behind the couch had reached out and jabbed her with a single finger. She froze. The kind of stillness where every muscle goes rigid even as your mind starts sprinting. She knew she was alone in that room. She de-watched the last person leave. The open doorway was in front of her, but her back was exposed to the rest of the room, which now felt about 10 degrees colder. Elle didn't turn around. Something deep inside told her that whatever had just touched her was not something she wanted to lay eyes on. Instead, she squeezed her eyelids tighter, pretended to shift like someone half-waking, and forced herself to stay still. Eventually, somehow, she slipped back into sleep. By morning, she almost convinced herself she'd dreamed the whole thing. Almost. Another night, not long after, she chose a movie over sleep, sitting on the same couch, flickering light from the TV painting the walls. The break room door stayed open, as always. The heavy door from the patient holding area, though, was shut. Halfway through the movie, she heard it. The distinct, familiar creak of the heavy door's hinges as it swung open. Then, seconds later, the loud, automatic slam as it closed again. In a busy hospital, that sound meant someone walking through, another nurse, a doc, a tech. Normally, you'd hear footsteps, voices, the rattle of carts. This time there was nothing, no footsteps, no chatter, no shadow passing in the gap under the break room door, just the sound of a door opening and closing all by itself. Elle stared at the hallway, heart thudding. All it would have taken was a few steps to lean over and look, to verify there was a coworker there or to confirm the worst possibility, that the hallway was empty. She stayed on the couch. Call it cowardice. Call it wisdom. She decided that in a hospital already packed with the dead in memory if not in body, she didn't need proof that something unseen was clocking in for the night shift too. Fort Riley's hospital wasn't just a place where lives were saved and lost. It was another node in a web of strange activity spread across the post. Barracks, housing, training grounds, wards. If even half these stories are true, then Fort Riley isn't just a duty station. It's a layered graveyard of moments, frozen in time, replaying themselves in whatever way they can. And yet, every PCS cycle, new names show up on orders. New families move into old quarters. New privates drag rucksacks into rooms that already have more than enough residents. Some of them will make it through their entire assignment without seeing anything stranger than a busted washing machine. Others will come home one night to find their kitchen gutted, their stairs suddenly treacherous, their sleep no longer entirely their own. The Army has forms for everything: leave, housing, medical equipment. What it doesn't have is a block to check for. I would prefer not to share my billet with whatever came before me, but soldiers still try. They joke about dream sheets. They hope for palm trees and ocean breezes, and they swap horror stories about the posts no one wants, even if, technically, the dead don't care what you wrote down. So, would you put Fort Riley on your dream sheet after all that? For anyone watching who's never dealt with military paperwork, a dream sheet is that optimistic little form where you write down the duty stations you'd prefer to go to when it's time to PCS. You pick a few places, maybe near family or somewhere with nice weather or just anywhere that doesn't look like the surface of the moon. People trade tips about how to game it. Some swear you should put the worst option first, so the detailers will feel bad and send you somewhere nicer. Others say never write down the really good places or you'll jinx it. In reality, the dream sheet mostly exists to give you a brief taste of hope before the needs of the service chew it up. Ask around and you'll hear the same pattern. I put in for Germany, Hawaii, and Italy, and they sent me to the middle of nowhere instead. I've known folks who did get lucky, to be fair, but for most of us, orders feel more like a roulette spin than a wish list, and the sheet definitely doesn't have a checkbox for, please avoid haunted base with demons that shove people down stairwells. Back when I signed up, my recruiter painted a very specific picture of my future. That's his job, after all, sell you on a vision and get your signature on the dotted line. I tested, filled out paperwork, and said I wanted to be a linguist. He nodded, told me to be patient, said the pipeline was long but worth it. For months, I heard the same line. It's coming, just hang in there. Eventually, he looked me in the eye and said, you got it. You're locked in. I shipped out to boot camp imagining a couple of sunny years in Monterey, walking to class by the ocean, learning some hard language that would look impressive on a clearance sheet. Russian, maybe. Mandarin. Something I could brag about later. Then in training, someone with a clipboard and zero emotion in their voice told me, "You're not going to be a linguist. Your signal's intelligence now." Different job, different school, different coast altogether. Instead of California sunsets, I got Florida humidity. Instead of the path I'd been picturing for nearly a year, I got something else. Not bad, just not what had been promised. If you've worn a uniform, you probably have your own version of that story. Your own little recruiter myth that cracked in half the second real orders hit. The military is full of promises that dissolve on contact with reality. That's part of why these Fort Riley stories hit so hard. The whole structure of military life is built on predictability. Orders, timetables, rosters, tests, inspections. You're supposed to be able to measure everything, performance, readiness, even your urine. Now layer the supernatural on top of that. You've got barracks where chairs throw themselves, and something with a black tail stalks the hallway. On-post houses where something uses your wife's trauma like graffiti, or stands on the stairs waiting to see who it can push next. A hospital where the door opens for a visitor nobody can see, and something pokes the only person brave or tired enough to sleep alone, and who's living in those spaces. People under constant stress, drug-tested on the regular, evaluated for any sign they're not all there. Cops, medics, pilots, infantry. Folks who know that if they report the wrong thing the wrong way, it could end their career. If you were some malicious thing hanging around a base, why wouldn't you target them? Think about it. If a random civilian says, "My house is haunted," people might raise an eyebrow, but that's about it. If a soldier who works around weapons, classified systems, or sensitive missions starts telling everyone about the shadow with a tail that growled at him in the hallway, that turns into a mental health eval real fast. Predators don't just find weaknesses, they find people no one will believe. Maybe that's why so many of these stories come from the same categories of folks: military, cops, hospital staff. People who see the worst sides of humanity, who are already walking a tightrope between stress and burnout. Easy to gaslight, easy to write off, is what's at Fort Riley demonic. Residual echoes, something science hasn't caught up to yet. I don't know. I've read way too many accounts to shrug it all off as imagination, but I've also seen how quick our brains are to fill in blanks under pressure. Still, there's something about that black tail at the end of the hall that sticks with me. R kept circling back to it when he wrote in, not the oven, not even the deadbolt, but that shape moving like it owned the place. Maybe it wasn't a tail. Maybe it was a piece of something larger that his brain scrambled to categorize. Or maybe, on a post layered with mass graves, epidemics, and war, something older and meaner decided to walk the halls for a while. Whatever the explanation, one thing seems obvious. Fort Riley is the kind of place where history doesn't always stay in the history books. If you've ever done time there, whether in the barracks, the hospital, the airfields, or base housing, and you've got a story you've never really told because you were afraid of the look you'd get, I want to hear it. Sharing it doesn't just get it off your chest. It reminds everyone watching that they're not alone the next time the barracks door handle rattles for no reason at 300. If you've got a Fort Riley story, or any other base or war story that still keeps you up sometimes, drop it in the comments or email it in. Your experience might be the one that finally makes someone else feel a little less crazy. Before you head out, if you want more long-form stories like this, true accounts from the front lines, from the barracks, from the quiet hours between missions, hit like and help Signal boost the channel. It tells the algorithm that these stories matter, and it helps winds of thought keep digging up and sharing the ones that would otherwise stay buried. To everyone who's ever written in, who's ever taken the risk to say, "Here, what happened to me, believe it or not. Thank you." Your honesty is the backbone of episodes like this. And to those of you still in or still fighting battles on the inside long after your contract ended, you are not alone, and you are not weak for being haunted by memories or by things that go bump in the night. May you find peace wherever you're stationed, seen and unseen. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and maybe check who's really knocking before you open that door.